breaking news, Steve. This just happened a matter of minutes ago, literally. As you can see, people filing out of this ballroom. More than 1,000 people just got the news from the CEO of Unidos US that this is the case here. She says that she got on the phone with Biden. She talked to him, and she was informed that he does, in fact, have COVID. Apparently, he just tested positive for it, and so he is not able to make this appearance. Of course, he has been here for 2 days now, making appearances. He got here the night before last, actually, and then had a big appearance at the NAACP's convention, and he was scheduled to meet with folks here at Unidos US at their conference. We're talking about the largest Latino group gathering. These are social activists. Many of them care about social justice. They were expecting to hear from him, talking about a number of things. They were concerned about working families, education, immigration, climate change, all the like. And many of them said that they were anticipating this moment to happen. And then we started to learn that it was a delay after delay after delay. He was supposed to originally speak at 1:30. It's 3:08 right now. And so they went on with the program. They went on with some fireside chats. We heard from journalist Soledad O'Brien and also political commentator Ana Navarro, who talked to them about some of the issues facing the Latino community. And then yet another delay. We thought, okay, maybe he'll take the stage then. Then they had a comedian come up and kind of keep people busy. Then they decided to just play some music. And that's when we really started to think, okay, what's happening here? Because they had run out of things to do for their program. And this was very unusual. Then literally, just before you guys came to us a few moments ago, we heard from the CEO saying that she had talked to Biden and that he told her that he had in fact tested positive for COVID-19. She urged everyone to still get out the vote and to still do everything they can to vote in their interests, whatever those interests are for that individual. And then with that, everyone was dismissed. And as you can see, it's pretty much an empty ballroom here, but certainly not the news that anyone wanted to hear. In fact, when that news came down, there was a collective sigh in this room from the folks here because a lot of them were looking forward to meeting with him, and they've been waiting for hours. Steve?
But LaToya, there was definitely a lot of energy in that room when we spoke to you at noon. From where you are, is there any word on what the president's staff is going to do to get him treatment? Do you think they'll do it locally or put him on Air Force One, get him back to D.C.? Any word from where you are?
There's no indication of that right now. All we heard was just that one simple, shocking announcement from the CEO of this organization telling folks that he did in fact have COVID and that he was unable to attend and that he expressed his deep regrets for not being able to be here. Of course, our thoughts with the president. We don't know how his condition may be at this time, but of course we just saw him around this time yesterday over there at Mandalay Bay as he spoke to a huge crowd there at the NAACP convention. So certainly breaking news, shocking news, and not the news that anyone expected to hear.
Well, and he definitely was fired up yesterday when you were with him there at the NAACP convention. And we were also hearing that he went to Lindo Michoacan restaurant, which was why he might have been running a little bit late to get over to you at the MGM Grand.
Yeah, so we heard about those events. He also apparently did a Univision interview on the radio. We were told that because, of course, we have a reporter who is with the White House press corps right now. And so that was the latest that we got. But he also had events. You may remember he was with Stephen Horsford, our own congressman here from Nevada.
Right.
So he's had a very busy schedule the last 2 days. And, apparently at some point he contracted COVID and now he has to deal with that, and he's unable to be here for the folks in this room who were highly anticipating his visit. He was the keynote speaker this year, and a lot of people were saying that they couldn't wait to see him. And so again, that collective sigh of just like, wow, everyone was like, oh, that's literally what you heard.
LaToya,
just a mass group of people saying, because no one expected that news.
Right. Please don't go anywhere, LaToya. Just so you know, we're looking at a live picture right now from one of our crews at UMC, and what we are now seeing, LaToya, is a fairly high-profile police presence there at the entrance. So it would at least appear at this point that maybe they're going to bring the motorcade over to UMC just to make sure President Biden gets checked out.
Well, yeah, that certainly is news to us here. And again, everyone was just waiting. And then when she took the podium, took the mic, It was not the news that anyone thought they were about to hear, but certainly our thoughts with the president at this time.
Yeah, I can tell you just from some of my reporting last week, speaking with Dr. Khan, the dean at the UMC Med School, there are a couple of new variants making the rounds, and the good news is they aren't really that virulent. They're very contagious, but you know, it's kind of like a bad cold with a sore throat. So hopefully, if the president does indeed have COVID, that it's one of these less impactful variants that he's dealing with right now. But certainly in a large room like you're in right now, they wouldn't want somebody running around with COVID, because it could get a few people sick.
And you know what, Steve, it's one of those things. I mean, we know, if you harken back to 2020, 2021 even, COVID was at the top of every newscast. It's all we ever talked about because so many people were literally dying from it. And we've come a long way since then with all the vaccines, and it seems like we're hearing less and less of it, and you kind of forget about it. I mean, you'll occasionally see people, I've even seen a couple of people who showed up in this room with the mask on, but that's certainly not the norm these days. And so when you do hear COVID, you're like, oh, wow, yeah, it still is a reality. Unfortunately, we just haven't heard about it for quite some time. And so I think a lot of people weren't expecting to hear that news, because COVID is something that we've kind of put in our rear view, even though people are still contracting the virus every day.
It wasn't that long ago where HUD Secretary Javier Becerras was in that very room where you are a couple of days ago, talking to the Unidos U.S. people about the measures that HUD and the Biden administration were able to take to help get the COVID pandemic to wind down in the U.S. And he highlighted the free vaccines for everybody.
Right, the free vaccines, a lot of people have taken them up on it. A lot of people have said, you know, I've had enough vaccines, so possibly they're not doing it anymore. The president is probably not one of those people, though. I would imagine that he has had the latest and greatest vaccine. So hopefully that will help him with his condition. We don't know what that is. We don't know how sick he is, but the fact that we're seeing a presence possibly at UMC, could he be there? Possibly. Does that mean the worst? Not necessarily, because again, this is the most powerful person in the world, okay, not just in the U.S., and so they will take every single precaution that they need to make sure that he's okay. But certainly for a lot of people here in Las Vegas, this is the moment that we just couldn't have predicted. But here we are, and it's just a reminder to everyone that COVID is still here, it is still real, and so we do need to take those precautions. I mean, as you can see, I wish I could turn this camera around, but we're kind of stuck in place. There are so many of us kind of sandwiched in this really small place right here. We can't really move. People have been trying to walk by. That's why I'm putting my arm up here, because we're actually in an aisle here where people walk through. And so that's how tight these quarters are. You can only imagine all the glad handing he's been doing. He's probably been shaking a number of hands. He's been at numerous places. He's had numerous campaign stops just in the last 2 days. I mean, think about the impact of how many people he's come across in just such a short period of time.
That is a very good point. Latoya, we've been able to turn the video from where you were there at Unidos US when the announcement was made. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
He just tested positive for COVID. So of course we understand that he needs to take the precautions that have been recommended, and he did not obviously want to put anybody at risk. He said to tell my folks that we're not going to get rid of him that quickly. We're going to have a chance to hear from him in the future directly.
So Steve, just from that sound you just heard, it sounded like she actually was able to speak with the president, and that it seems like, I mean, he even made a joke with her about, you can't get rid of me just as easily. So hopefully that speaks well for how his condition may be at this time, that, you know, he's not one of those chronic patients. But again, we don't know. We're just going off of what we just heard moments ago in this very ballroom. Yeah, we can only speculate right now, Latoya, but you know, you got to think, as we look once again at some live pictures from UMC, you have to think that the reason he got tested in the first place maybe is because he wasn't feeling that great, or just kind of felt a little bit off. Yeah, and you know, you really couldn't tell yesterday. I mean, he had a ton of energy. He was laughing. He was, had a couple of barbs in there against his opponent and really had a lot of punchlines in his speech yesterday. And so from the looks of it, from what I could see, and, we weren't very far away from him, it looked like he was, in perfect health then, but you just never know. And that's one of the things about COVID. We don't know how long this has been, in his body. It incubates for a while. So even though he's been here for a number of days and he's been around a lot of people, it's not necessarily the case that he got it here.
Right.
We just don't know about that yet. And so these are the questions that we'll be asking in the coming days, but certainly the questions that everyone wants to know, because a lot is on the line, especially when you talk about a president that folks are already questioning. Does he have the stamina? Does he have the energy? They're questioning his age, especially in light of that poor debate performance that he had with former President Donald Trump. And so this is certainly something I would imagine the campaign did not want to see, and not a good moment for them as they're trying to prove that he has the energy, that he has the capacity to be the commander-in-chief. Now, COVID, obviously you can only do so much to prevent it. It happens to us all. I've had it myself. So certainly this is something, though, that they will try to do a little damage control to say, hey, he got COVID, but he can handle it.
Well, yeah, and it's next to impossible, as you were pointing out, to do all that handshaking and being in close quarters with so many people who, especially in a town like Las Vegas, they're in from all over the country, and still maintain those protocols. Right. and shake your hand, and the next thing you know, you're touching your eye, and boom, just like that, you can get it. So especially in the environment that you're in right now, you got to think that would be a good place to contract a little bout of COVID.
Oh, yeah, and as you mentioned, we do have a lot of visitors here. How many conventions do we have here right now? How many visitors do we have on a daily basis, on a yearly basis, coming in and out of Las Vegas? And not just from across the country, but all around the world. In fact, we talked to several people today. Some of them were from Nebraska, some of them from Arizona. So we're talking about people who come far and wide. I met somebody from Virginia the other day who was in town for the NAACP convention. So lots and lots of folks coming from here, coming to here, I should say, to hear from the president. Many of them, this was a highlight of their visit. Unfortunately, they're a little disappointed because they did not have this moment. To have the president speak before you, that's not something that happens every single day. And so a lot of people were hoping this is going to be their first time to actually see him in person, some of the people that we talked to. So I can only imagine what they're thinking right now. But then again, if someone has COVID, you wouldn't want them to come around you either. It's just the best precaution that they can take is to make sure that he's okay and that he's not spreading the virus to anyone else. Right. But we certainly don't know what his condition is right now, and I know a lot of people are trying to figure that out as we speak. Yeah,
it's not every day you can contract COVID from the President of the United States, but still, you've had delegates in that room as well, coming all the way in from Puerto Rico. While we're here, can we put this live picture from UMC back up, and just a little more speculation in the event that President Biden does in fact show up at UMC just to get checked out. In case you're joining us, it was just announced at Unidos US at the MGM Grand that he had tested positive for COVID. But LaToya, we could be in a situation here where for the first time, I think probably ever, that within a 4-day span, you would have the President of the United States and the other party's nominee for President of the United States, both visiting local emergency rooms.
Talk about it. Right? We're in unprecedented times for more reasons than one. Some of them for not so great reasons, obviously, what happened on Saturday and even what's happening right now. You don't want to see the president getting sick because, he has such a big, huge responsibility. But he has the best care. So we do know that. We do know that he has the best doctors, he has the best access to care, and so whatever they need to do for him, I'm sure they're doing for him right now, and hopefully we'll learn more as time goes on, hopefully later today. Is he at UMC? If so, why is he at UMC? Why wasn't it just, being under his doctor's care because he has his own doctor? So why the need to go to the local hospital if in fact that's the case? These are all the things that we need to iron out here. And when did he start to come down sick? What are his symptoms? When did he first notice that something just wasn't right? Or is this one of those things where they test him regularly, which I'm sure they do before he goes to every event, and this one is the one that turned up to be positive today? So an unfortunate situation, and you heard that video, that collective sigh when everyone heard that he was positive with COVID and that he would not be here today.
Yeah, let's go ahead and listen to that again, Latoya, since you were there when this happened, and we'll let everybody hear that collective sigh in the room when the announcement was made. Here it is.
He just tested positive for COVID. So of course we understand that he needs to take the precautions that have been recommended, and he did not obviously want to put anybody at risk. He said to tell my folks that we're not going to get rid of him that quickly. We're going to have a chance to hear from him in the future directly.
Okay, and that was the announcement. Latoya, we just got word. Did you get that? That reportedly now the president is headed for Air Force One.
Okay, so not at UMC, headed for Air Force One. That's a good sign, right?
Yeah,
because we know
of course,
UMC is our trauma center, and so that would certainly not be the place that anyone would want to hear that the President of the United States is actually getting treatment, because that's where some of the worst cases here in our state end up. And so good news there that he is on Air Force One, headed that way, and that I would presume that he would be treated there in D.C. and hopefully get the all clear when the time is there.
Yeah, and as we mentioned a few moments ago, and you know, at this point we can only speculate exactly what's going on, because we've been trying to get in touch with the campaign as well as the people that are directly responsible for the president's agenda, the White House people. But we are in the middle of what the Centers for Disease Control has been calling a summer surge of COVID, a couple of new variants making the rounds. And as we mentioned earlier, they are very contagious, but they are not as virulent. Dr. Khan from the med school had told us that it's in the nature of a virus to try to survive by making itself more contagious and not as deadly to the host, because if the host goes away, then the virus can't reproduce. So these new strains that we've seen over the last couple of years are certainly a lot easier for people to get over, and we can, I think, be safe to assume that the president, if he's contracted COVID, has one of those strains that's going around right now that make you feel a little sick, but it won't put you in the hospital.
Yeah, we can all only hope, and of course he has the best treatment, so we do know that he's getting the best care imaginable right now, and hopefully anyone who was near the president, he's been doing a lot of glad handing, as we've said. He's met a lot of people over just the last couple of days in our area. If you've come into contact with the president, if you had a photo op, it would probably be best for you to make sure that you also don't have COVID and to get tested as soon as possible, because it is one of those things that it spreads. We've all been here. It spreads like wildfire, and so you really want to make sure you're taking the precautions. So it's a really good idea, I believe, for all of us listening to just make sure we're still taking those precautions. Because like I said, it's one of those things where you rarely see someone with a mask now. You rarely think twice about shaking someone's hand now. I know there was a time when we were always doing the elbow or the fist bump, and now people are shaking hands again. And so it's one of those things we've got a little bit laxed. Maybe you don't need to go full-fledged mask, but maybe just thinking more about washing the hands and making sure you're keeping your safe distance from folks when need be. And then also, instead of shaking hands, maybe we need to go back to that elbow or that fist bump. But certainly some good news that the president is on Air Force One now, or at least heading that way, instead of being at UMC, our trauma center.
Well, I don't know if we're able to do it on this short of notice, and I'll apologize to the control room for putting them on the spot. But Latoya was talking about the president's energy just 24 hours ago when she was covering him making an appearance at the Mandalay Bay Convention Center for the NAACP National Convention, and he was wound up. And we're watching video of the president right now doing some handshaking at. This is from Lindo, Michoacan, where he was before he was supposed to head over to the MGM for the Unidos US conference, and he's shaking a lot of hands there. So Latoya, I mean, yesterday, like you said, he was fired up. He
was fired up. He got the crowd riled up. I mean, he was some people said, oh, he reminded me of, the Joe Biden of old when he had that, that fight in him and just really going after his opponent, making the jokes, doing all the things to really draw in the crowd. Of course, this was a pretty soft crowd for him. It was a friendly crowd. A lot of people we talked to, at least, said that they were voting for Biden, or at least strongly leaning that way. And so he really felt at home with this crowd and had some moments with them. And the people we talked to after the fact said that they loved the Joe Biden that they saw yesterday, that he really gave them a lot of confidence that he was the man for the job in November, and that all the talk we've been hearing within the party about should he step aside or not, a lot of them were saying after seeing that Joe Biden yesterday, no, they were all in, which coincidentally, Steve, was actually the name of the convention. Their theme this year is all in. And so he told all the crowd, he was like, I'm all in, are you all in? And of course he got a rousing applause, standing ovations, more than one standing ovation, and many of them chanting at times 4 more years, 4 more years. So it's just really one of those things where you're like, wow, that was just 24 hours ago. And now we're hearing that he is leaving Las Vegas, not fulfilling all of his campaign stops, one of them being for one of his largest voting blocs, Latinos. It was really important for him to be here. And so unfortunately, he couldn't be here, according to the White House and to the president, because he now has COVID and they have to handle that. But he told them, as you heard from the CEO, he told them, hey, you can't get rid of me that easily, that he would be back. So hopefully that will be the case for folks who were anticipating hearing from him today.
Well, and as you pointed out, this particular gathering, especially important to him because there have been a number of reports and polls suggesting that his Hispanic support has been eroding of late, and this would be a good opportunity for Biden to shore up that voting bloc, which has been very important to his election efforts 4 years ago. Especially, okay, now we got some live pictures, Latoya, just so you know, of Air Force One, and it is taxiing out. So they did not waste any time getting him back to the airport and getting him on Air Force One. So we're watching Air Force One taxi out of Harry Reid International Airport. And we have, under the airport protocols right now, the air traffic has been grounded, come to a stop, to let Air Force One get out of here. What we're going to do right now also, Latoya, let's go to Atra Al-Nashar, joining us live from the Republican National Convention floor in Milwaukee. No, okay, I'm sorry, we don't have Atra yet. So we'll try to get to Atra in a moment. Yeah, Latoya, go ahead. We're watching Air Force One taxiing out.
I was just going to say that's good news to see that they're able to get him in and out of here, and so that speaks a little somewhat to what his condition may be. But you were talking earlier about the folks here and why this was so important for him to be here with Latino voters. As you know, not only just Latino voters who were sitting in this room, but this was going to be broadcast, of course, to the world. Right. But here in Las Vegas, it was also important because he really needs our electoral votes. I mean, we are a swing state. It's really important for him if he wants the White House to shore up this state. In fact, that's why we've seen him so much, and Kamala Harris, his VP, in this area. And so when I was talking to some of the voters earlier, they kind of spoke to that. And some of them were saying, okay, he's done some things that we like. We've been watching him, but we want to see, can he continue to move the ball forward? What is he going to do for us the next 4 years? And they were hungry for that information. I mean, people, you've covered presidents before. You know, you have to come hours and hours in advance. So people put in a lot of time into trying to make this moment happen for them because they wanted to see him in person and hear directly from him about what the next 4 years could look like. Now, I asked them also, as you mentioned, about the eroding support that he's been getting from some of the Latinos. Now, some people kind of shrugged that off and said they didn't really believe the polls. One man I talked to said that he kind of felt like maybe the polls aren't necessarily something that we should just all use as Bible. But he also said this. He said, you know, I hear that a lot of people supposedly more people are going over to Trump's camp or saying that they're going to support him in November. He said for him, he felt like it was just a little too late. But then I also heard that on the flip side. One person here said they thought that some of the things that Biden has done that he approved of maybe have come too late. And so you're hearing from a community that thinks that sometimes they're neglected and that it's only when it's election times they they feel that, all of a sudden they become uber important to the candidates. And so they really wanted to hear from him because of that. But it did count to them that he at least showed up or was going to show up, and they would be able to hear from him directly.
Yeah. Just momentarily, just seconds ago, while you were talking, Latoya, we had wheels up on Air Force One, that massive 747 that is designated for the president. Please stay there, Latoya. We want to go over to Kristen Drummond right now, joining us now live from UMC, which is the place where, at least based on some of the police presence there, Kristen, it looked like we might get President Biden to stop by there just to get checked out, but he's now out of here.
That's correct, Steve. As you can see here behind me, there is a law enforcement presence. It has since seemed to have died down. We got out here just about 30 minutes ago. We did see what appeared to be security dogs going into the hospital, possibly to make sure that it was safe in case the president did arrive here. Now, like we're hearing, President Biden possibly sick, and it appears he will no longer be coming to UMC. As you can see, the vans as well as the Clark County School District Police are about to clear this area out. We did see CEO Mason Van Houweling outside of UMC when we were alerted that he may be coming to the hospital, possibly to get checked out, see whatever may be bothering him. But again, as you can see, law enforcement is starting to clear out. There is no more action around the trauma area. And as we know, it appears he will be getting on Air Force One to head back to Washington, D.C. Steve?
All right. Thank you, Kristen. Please stay there. I'm sure we'll be touching base with you again. We're going to bring in Dr. Dahlia Wax. We got the A-team for this, just to stay on top of this so you know what's happening with President Biden. And Latoya, I know you're still listening, so if you have any questions for Dr. Dahlia, chime in. So for starters, Doctor, tell us about this summer surge of COVID that we're seeing, that apparently one of the latest people to contract it is the President of the United States.
Of course. Yeah, sadly, COVID seems to like the summer as opposed to a lot of the other coughs and colds that we see during the winter season. So it's not uncommon for us to have COVID surges in the summer, whether it's the flirt mutation, the LB1, KP3. We have a few Omicron subvariants that are now taking hold, causing a rise in hospitalizations, even a rise in deaths, luckily not as severe as we saw in the beginning of the pandemic. We are also challenged with the fact that a lot of at-home COVID tests do not always pick it up right away. So when we have people call in with headache, cough, stuffy nose, fever, sometimes pink eye, some difficulty breathing, especially going up and down the stairs, and they test negative at home for COVID, we can't officially say they're clear because sometimes it'll take a couple days for the new variants to be detected on these rapid tests. So the good news is we're hearing initial reports that President Biden's pulse oxygen level, or the oxygen in his blood, is at 97%. Very good. We also learned that he's taken Paxlovid from NBC News, which is the antiviral, which means he's able to take oral medications. They say his symptoms are mild. The Paxlovid is the oral antiviral we have right now that is very, very effective. And the fact that he didn't stop by UMC, which I think is one of the best hospitals ever. I trained there. But he was able to get on Air Force One, means he felt well enough to still travel. So we're being told that his symptoms are mild, but obviously with his age and with this strain causing some more severity than we've seen with other strains, we are concerned.
Well, I would offer my sympathies to the president because I have had Paxlovid last summer when I had a bout with COVID. And the taste that it puts in your mouth for a lot of people is nothing short of nasty. So if the president is going through that, God love him. So what's going on, Dr. Dahlia, with this spike in cases? Is it because in the summer we tend to get out more, because in the winter it's not as easy to pass it around because we tend to be inside a little more often?
Yeah, it's interesting because usually with cough and cold season, it spikes when school starts because students are all in the same classroom now and they're a captive audience. And then during the winter, because it's colder outside, so we're more indoors. So most cold viruses don't really persist, that aren't very pervasive in the summer because we are outside, because we're getting vitamin D. because we're eating a lot more fruits and vegetables in the summer than we do in the winter when we eat our comfort foods. But COVID is notorious for violating every rule we know about viruses. Most viruses are supposed to go away in 5 to 7 days. COVID persists. Most viruses aren't supposed to have lingering symptoms. COVID does. And so it's no shock that COVID knows how to kind of be the opposite virus, so to speak. And so it gains traction also because it doesn't have to compete with flu. It doesn't have to compete with strep. It doesn't have to compete with some of the other illnesses. And that's my theory behind why we see some of these surgences. Also, it allows plenty of time for there to be a new variant, because a lot of times there's a multiple month lag. And then if it is, let's say, brewing during the winter time part of the globe, the month travel time, transit time, right, kind of equates to us getting a lot of these in the summer.
Well, at least when it comes to COVID, as we are watching the president's departure from the ground, what happens here does not always stay here. So, Dr. Dahlia, just out of curiosity, what is a typical recovery time as we watch President Biden go up the lower ladder into Air Force One under his own power? What's your bounce back time on this?
Exactly. So with mild COVID, for those of us who have had COVID and have some natural immunity or vaccine immunity and boosters, we've had some people tell me their illness is so mild, lasting anywhere from a couple days to 5 days. We've had others where it just continues to lag, and it could go on for days or weeks. Again, with President Biden's age and health status, I couldn't comment on how well he's going to snap back or not. I also am a little unclear how many boosters he's gotten. We do know that the boosters do offer protection against the COVID variant, but also for those of us who have had some natural immunity, we're noticing some of us who are kind of the frequent flyers, we seem to have milder illness. The issue though, and the caveat is this strain is causing more hospitalizations. So to try to explain that with the backdrop of us having a robust vaccination protocol, as well as many of us already having natural immunity to it, it is a little bit more of a tricky variant. So I want to say, anywhere from 5 to 7 days. The Paxlovid course is 5 days, but unfortunately I can't because it's a newer variant.
Right. Well, the Omicron variant sure had an ominous sounding name, and now we've graduated to what, flirt as the subvariant.
Yes.
But I guess some people aren't exactly having a great time with it. As far as symptoms, I mean, we're talking about basically cold symptoms that you would typically have. But one of the things Dr. Khan from the med school also brought up is if you have a sore throat, that's a pretty good indication that you need to get a COVID test.
Absolutely right. We are having many people call in saying, I have strep. We don't see a lot of strep this time of year. And when we look at their throats, it doesn't have the typical signs or symptoms. And many people are swabbing negative for strep. And sore throat, I'm seeing, is one of the initial symptoms for some people of this. Then comes the nasal congestion, then comes the cough. And interestingly, over the past year or two, I've been seeing pink eye with some patients, wow, including adults, that seems to come day 5 to 7 of the virus. And so a little bit different than what we saw back in 2020. Some people are losing their taste and smell, some not. We're not seeing as much of that, but it still could happen. And then another indicator is when people tell me when they walk around or go upstairs, they feel short of breath. It's called dyspnea on exertion. That can also be a sign of COVID as well.
LaToya, go ahead, chime in.
Yeah, Dr. Wax, I had a quick question. We are getting reports now that the president has already received his first dose of Paxlovid and that he will be self-isolating at his Delaware home. But I had a quick question about the people who have been in contact with him here in Las Vegas. What is the incubation period? When should they start to get tested? I mean, would it be fruitful to even get tested at this point if you have been in contact with the president as early as today?
Fantastic question. So if you remember early on in 2020, we would have to isolate for 14, actually we would quarantine for 14 days. The difference between quarantine and isolation is quarantine is when you're questioning if you have it and you're not sure. Isolation is I'm sick. That's how I remember it. Where isolation is you have it. And originally the quarantine time was 14 days. for symptoms to show. And nobody was able to go to work, nobody was able to go to school. And the isolation time, according to the CDC, was 10 days. That has changed. Now that we have natural immunity, we have vaccine immunity, we have people having mild symptoms, some people being afebrile, the CDC has loosened some of their guidelines in terms of who needs to test, who needs to treat. I always recommend everybody's an individual. If you are high risk for severe COVID or for other morbidities that could come with COVID, you may want to be a little bit more diligent on testing and then talking to your medical provider and then treating once you know if you do have it. For those individuals who have been already like me, sneezing and sniffling for the past few months anyway and are testing negative, if you feel sick, use common sense, stay away from others. If you're vulnerable, then you want to obviously protect yourself. But if it really is an individual decision at this point, and the CDC urges that if you feel sick and you think you're actively sick, to use common sense.
Thank you, Dr. Dahlia. And if you're just tuning in, less than 10 minutes ago, President Biden aboard Air Force One departed Las Vegas early. He was scheduled to speak at the Unidos U.S. convention underway right now, where Latoya is at the MGM Grand. Latoya, I assume that room is pretty much emptied out at this point.
Pretty much empty, except for us who are still working, because obviously our work just began when we found out this information that, in fact, he was not going to be speaking, but not only that he wasn't able to speak, but the reason why he wasn't able to speak. There are some reports starting to come in now. As I mentioned earlier, he has received that first dose of Paxlovid, and we're told that he will be self-isolating at his home in Delaware. Apparently that's in line with the CDC's guidelines for how to treat COVID going forward. We're also told that he started to feel sick after his first appearance, that he felt fine this morning, but that he started to have a runny nose, apparently. Also has a non-productive cough and general malaise, and so his doctor is with him. And Karine Jean-Pierre, his press secretary, she also released a statement saying that he felt okay for his first event of the day, but given that he was not feeling better, point of care testing for COVID-19 was conducted and the results were positive for COVID-19. I'm also seeing other outlets reporting that the president himself has said that he feels fine. Obviously, we have not talked to the president ourselves, but it is in line with what we heard from the CEO of Unidos US. She actually said that she spoke to the president and that he told her that he regretted that he couldn't come and that unfortunately he had tested positive for COVID-19. So obviously he was able to talk to her, and he's able to tell other folks that he's feeling good. But as a precaution, obviously, not only with the fact that he has COVID and is highly contagious, also with his age, they want to make sure that he is self-isolating and that he's taking care of himself.
Well, the best thing you can do, right now with this new summer surge going on, is if you do feel a little bit off, even if it's just a summer cold, even if it's not COVID, just try to avoid people, stay at home. Unfortunately, if you're the president of the United States and you're flying around in Air Force One with a large contingent of White House staff and reporters, it's not always very easy to totally avoid everyone in the room. So maybe, for a lot of the folks where you are, Latoya, at the MGM Grand, all things considered, it's best the president plays it safe.
Right. And, when we were here yesterday, not here, but just across the way at Mandalay Bay for the NAACP convention, a number of people, before he actually spoke, and I would imagine that would have been the case today, a number of people were lined up to go in and meet him and have a photo opportunity with him. And so all of those folks, I would imagine, would need to start paying attention to how they're feeling and take the advice of Dr. Walks, who we just heard from, about what they should be doing going forward to make sure that they don't have the virus and that, more importantly, they're not spreading the virus to others. And so he's had really big events like the one yesterday when that was a really large ballroom and he met a lot of those people in person. I think as I was standing out in the hallway for the folks who were about to go meet him, I counted at least 10 that I saw. I don't know how many people were there to meet him before I arrived at that point, but certainly a number of people were able to meet him. Then he had smaller campaign events, as we know as well. He came into contact with our very own Congressman, Stephen Horsford, and so he has been dealing with a lot of people in a very short amount of time, many of them here in Las Vegas, who will now have to start thinking about their own health. But what we're hearing about the president's health is that so far he's at least saying that he feels good, and his own press secretary is is saying that he's doing well as well. And so we're taking them at their word right now. They said that he's had his first dose of Paxlovid, which of course will help him heal with this process and hopefully not feel as bad. You mentioned that it has a bad taste in his mouth, but when you have COVID, you just want to get rid of the thing.
Yeah, it's a small price to pay, I guess, all things considered, because it does help you
Right.
feel better in about 24 hours. You'll notice a big difference. Latoya, I understand we have just spotted a post on X, a tweet, if you will, from the White House. Do we have that? Can we put that up? Nope, not up yet, but the White House is also telling us what you've just been telling us, Latoya, that the president has tested positive. Okay, we have it. Let's go ahead and put it up now. And the Unidos US appearance today was also one of several, as Latoya mentioned, including an appearance that he was going to make with the transport workers local 556 that was on his agenda. Here is the post on X from the White House, basically saying that the president is experiencing mild symptoms after a positive COVID-19 test. As Latoya told us, he's headed back to Delaware on Air Force One right now, where he left Las Vegas about 20 minutes ago. He has had upper respiratory symptoms, which is common with this, the runny nose, the non-productive cough, and a general feeling of malaise as we watched him a moment ago go up the lower ladder on Air Force One. But he will be self-isolating and following the CDC protocols to shake this. And just as a footnote, the White House did note that his temperature is normal right now, 97.8. So everything, all of his symptoms seem to be very mild at this point. But Latoya, this is a time, as we both know, where President Biden has come under intense scrutiny as to whether or not he is fit and capable to finish out his term and run for a second 4 years.
Right. I mean, he's 81 years old. We all saw that debate performance. And of course, people in his own party after that started to lose faith that he was the man for the job. And as late as yesterday, I saw that some of them were still kind of expressing their doubt that he should be the ultimate nominee on the ballot come November. So this is not the news I would imagine that the campaign would want out there, but unfortunately this is where they are at this point, where he is sick. He does have COVID, mild symptoms or not, and so I'm sure that will be some fodder for those who are against him being at the top of the ticket. Time will tell, but he was doing all that he could, I would imagine, with these trips to show his virulence, to show that he still has energy, to show that, you know, he was up for the job. I mean, he mentioned yesterday his own age, saying, you know, at one point he said, my mom used to say, you know, you'll never be forsaken, and yes, I am old, but at least I tell the truth. And so he was trying to fight back some of those concerns that people, again, in his own party have expressed. But I'll tell you, the people that I talked to here at Unidos US and then also at the NAACP just yesterday, they're not concerned about his age. They said there's too much at stake with this election, and they felt like that was just something that us in the media that we were focusing on, and maybe a few people in his party, but they were saying for them, the voter, they were happy with what he had done thus far, and they were looking forward to what he could do going forward. And they were really just concerned about what direction this country could take if he wasn't in office for a second time. That's all they seem to care about. They said, we all get old, we all have issues, I have bad days. One man told me, look, I'm old too, and some days I have bad days. Don't you have a bad day? And so that literally has been the reaction from folks who were here to hear from him in Las Vegas.
Well, and this is also coming at a time when, you know, as we said, he's under scrutiny, but the campaign is starting to hit high gear. And, you know, for at least for the time being, we don't know exactly how long he'll be off the campaign trail now because of this. Pretty safe to assume that, what is today? Today's Wednesday, at least through the weekend and probably into the middle of next week.
Yeah, and I mean, this week is good real estate for him to be on all of our TV screens, right? Because he's going up against the RNC. I mean, that's their big pep rally, right? That's Donald Trump's big moment and the Republicans' big moment to kind of show their fervor and what they're going to do for this country and get people riled up and fired up, right? And so to counter that, the president had this very ambitious schedule where he was going around to various groups, big voting block groups here in Las Vegas, taking advantage of all the people who are, the thousands of people, I should say, that are at the NAACP convention in town this week, and then also taking advantage of, getting in front of one of the largest Latino groups as well. And so this was his moment to kind of shore up those votes, especially when you think about the fact that us here in Nevada, our votes count, every single one of them, because we're a swing state. And so I would imagine that he's disappointed that he wasn't able to finish out and make every single appearance that he's scheduled to make.
Yes, in an electoral map that could potentially be as close as some people expected. Nevada's electoral college votes, not a terribly large contingent, but every vote counts on that electoral map. While I'd have a chance, I just want to say thanks to Dr. Dahlia for joining us and giving us the latest on the summer surge. And in case you're just tuning in, LaToya has been at the Unidos U.S. convention, where it was suddenly announced that President Biden had tested positive for COVID-19, and his anticipated appearance there was basically called off. And a short time later, he boarded Air Force One and was leaving Las Vegas.
Yeah, certainly some impactful news here. And if we could, Steve, is there any way that we could go ahead and run back that sound from the CEO of the organization when she made that shocking announcement?
Yep, I think they're going to make it happen for us.
He just tested positive for COVID. So, of course, we understand that he needs to take the precautions that have been recommended, and he did not obviously want to put anybody at risk. He said to tell my folks that we're not going to get rid of him that quickly. We're going to have a chance to hear from him in the future directly.
Yeah, so that was that announcement that happened here in real time just minutes ago. And to say that people were shocked is just an understatement. A lot of them had waited hours. Okay, you have to go through security clearance. You have to, Secret Service is here. It's a big ordeal, and it's a big undertaking to clear all these folks to make sure they can be in this room. This room that I'm in, it fits a little more than 1,000 people, I'm told by one of the organizers. So that's how many people were here in place, ready for him to speak. And the organizers did everything they could to try to keep the program going along, waiting for him. Because, as you know, Steve, you've covered presidents. They're not always on time. And so
right.
You expect them to be a little late. But when they started to run out of things to do to keep people busy, they had a comedian take the stage. They had a fireside chat with some, journalist and a political contributor that, national folks took the stage to try to, move the program along. And then after a while, it was like they just started playing music because there was nothing else they could do. They literally had multiple speakers take the stage. We heard from the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights with the Department of Justice that spoke as well. And a high-ranking Latina woman also took the stage with Wells Fargo. I think she was with Wells Fargo, and talked about her position and the plight of Latinos and how they have, succeeded in many areas and how there's still so much work to do. And so they were moving forward with their program, but they started to run out of programming. A lot of people were just kind of sitting around. They played some music. People were talking amongst themselves. And then we heard that announcement from the CEO saying that he was not going to make it, that it was regrettable, that he told them that it was unfortunate. But he also told the CEO, she says, that he told her to not count him out. They couldn't get rid of him that easily, and that he would be back. But, when you're coming from Nebraska, when you're coming from Virginia,
right.
and maybe this is the only time you could have been here to see the president in your lifetime, some of these folks won't get that opportunity if he does, in fact, decide to come back and talk to this group.
LaToya, we want to break away from you real quick and go over to Tiffany Lane, who's joining us now on the phone from Harry Reid International, and that's where we saw Air Force One leaving just a moment ago. Tiffany, are you with us?
Yes, Steve. So this has been a very hectic day, just over the last hour or so, as you mentioned, is when we heard that President Biden had tested positive for COVID. I want to say over the last half hour, I was actually there at Air Force One when they took him to get on the plane to end his trip early because of that news. A lot of people were shouting questions at him, asking, "Are you okay?" He didn't respond with anything specifically. Maybe he's holding off on that, but he did give a thumbs up saying that he is okay. He would not answer any questions regarding whether he has any symptoms, but it was very loud because of the plane, of course. So immediately, I mean, we had so many plans. I was part of the press pool yesterday as well as today. So we have been following him everywhere. And we did notice that something was unusual after his first stop at Lindo, Michoacan, a Latino-owned family business in the East Valley. He was supposed to be doing an interview there for a radio station, but we were in the car for an unusual amount of time waiting to go to that next stop for the Unidos US event. And that's when we started hearing some of the news. And then all of a sudden we were being rushed in the press pool cars. We are the ones that followed him throughout his visit. And we were being rushed. We didn't know where we were going. And then all of a sudden we noticed we were here with him at the airport. We did get video of him getting on that plane. But again, this all happened so quickly. We believe that he was still inside the restaurant as the news was coming, but we couldn't see any of that. But it looked like, since we have been following him everywhere, that we were at the location with him the whole time when the news came
Tiffany,
to him.
I wanted to ask you about that because there had been some discussion, and since you're covering this from the press pool side, there had been some discussion that they might be taking the president to UMC to get checked out. Are you familiar with anything that might have been involved in that decision to instead go to Air Force One?
So that was a rumor that we were hearing in the press pool, but it wasn't something that was being confirmed by any of the press staff that are with his team. They would not tell us if he was being taken to the hospital. They did not talk to us really of the decision. What happened was really that we just were told, get in the van, and then all of a sudden we're getting to the airport. So really the news that came from the White House team through a statement that came from them, as well as the Unidos US event. The CEO who made that announcement at the conference, they were rushing us so quickly that they've been providing that information to us as we were getting to Harry Reid Airport to get President Joe Biden to Air Force One as quickly as possible.
All right, Tiffany, thank you very much. We're going to wrap it up for now, but be sure to stay with News 3 through the rest of the evening for continuing coverage on President Biden's bout with COVID-19.